TradeSquare is Australia's first business-to-business marketplace connecting people, brands and organisations into this diverse ecosystem in a unique global landscape. Through pivoting, transforming and reshaping, Australian businesses have an opportunity to create the model for the future that aligns with the world's needs and leveraging the power of a collaborative approach. Through the TradeSquare podcast, we will bring together dynamic, diverse and thought-provoking leaders from business, government and organisations to have conversations to further enable new thinking for the future. Welcome to TradeSquare, enabling small business growth through digital capabilities. I'm Catherine van der Meulen, and joining us today on this podcast is Reggie Cabal, Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director at Oryx Australia and New Zealand. How are you?
I'm good, Catherine. Thank you.
And so tell us.
And yourself?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Always good in this part of the world. So tell us, who is Reggie Cabal?
Who is Reggie Cabal? As you already noted, I am the CEO and MD of Oryx Australia and New Zealand. I've been in the role for nearly 6 years. Just by way of background on who Oryx is, Oryx ANZ is a wholly owned subsidiary of Oryx Group, a diversified financial services company that's based out of Tokyo, Japan. We operate in roughly 37 countries, and in Australia and New Zealand, we are locally headquartered in Macquarie Park, New South Wales, and have been in business for nearly 35 years. Reggie Cabal is actually an American. Prior to living in Australia, I lived and worked in Silicon Valley for 20 years.
And so tell us about your original call to adventure to joining the world of Oryx Australia, New Zealand.
The call to adventure, and that is a call to adventure. It has been one. Oryx was actually a client of mine in one of the software companies that had worked for in the Valley. And I'm going to be aging myself here, Catherine. This was in the time of Y2K.
Goodness gracious.
And the USA operations was already an existing client, and ANZ operations was looking for a solution, and we were able to provide them with a compelling proposition, and that's how they became a client. And they were up and running before Y2K. So that's how my involvement in the ANZ operations came about.
So thinking about the world of small business, how in 2020 do you think organizations are creating more value in the world to really thrive and survive?
Well, I think the starting point for me, and you know some of these things already, but just as a checking in, when we think about small businesses in Australia, 98% of all businesses in Australia are considered small businesses. And some interesting facts around that, 35% of small businesses constitutes the gross domestic profit in the country. And also hires 44% of the entire workforce. And then the other thing is that 35% are run by women. So as a block or as a demographic, small businesses have a lot of weight and merit. And so, the ability to be able to recognize that is critical. Now, the other bit is there are obviously different types of small businesses, so it runs across different spectrum, no different than it is with larger organizations. And so really that value proposition that you can create for them really needs to cut across all those different industries, and the value component needs to be consistent for all those.
And so knowing the role that people play in such an integral role in transforming Australian businesses, how have you seen wonderful humans in your organisation and even outside your organisation really stepping up to the challenge that we've seen in the last 6 months?
The interesting thing that I've seen, and it's not necessarily work related, and certainly I think it got amplified with the pandemic. people are more patient, and they're and this is kind of a sounds like a byline, but seeing it in action, I think is what just really resonated with me. People are just kinder, and you see these random acts of kindness across, and I'm seeing that a lot more. And that's the thing that kind of really been highlighted for me in the last 6 months: patience and kindness with people, um, in how they do things, and how to interact with each other. And I think as a result, I think the communication lines become a lot better, because people are really understanding it. People are taking the time to understand each other a little bit better.
So, Reggie, what's a key message that you are truly passionate about that Australian businesses should be adopting?
Adaptability and flexibility. I think what the pandemic's really kind of highlighted for a lot of industries is one, our ability to adapt to the situation becomes paramount, and then the ability to um, adapt and then be flexible in terms of how we adapt, and trying different things. Those are all key things I think that any organization, whether large or small, I think becomes very critical. Certainly within the organization at Works, um, we are highlighting, our ability to be flexible, to be able to address, the requirements of our clients. We've got clients across the different spectrum and different sizes, different industries. And so our ability to be able to adapt and put solutions together that gives our clients a lot of flexibility, becomes really highlighted.
I remember someone saying years ago about creating a business that actually reflects the customer's needs. And it's such a simple notion and it's such a simple concept, but I feel like a lot of businesses do the things that they want the customer to do as opposed to tailoring their business to the needs. And I think a lot of businesses, particularly this year, have had to go, well, if our business is no longer relevant and we haven't been able to adapt based on our current business model, why don't we look at creating something that really does reflect the needs of the people that we want to connect most with? So can you give one like case study or an example of something particularly at Oryx that you have had to adapt to suit your customers' needs this year?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Catherine. The thing that always keeps coming into my head is providing a bespoke solution. There's a quick and a rush to provide a out of the box solution, for many clients, and yet the reality is that I believe a lot more clients um, would appreciate, um, being able to kind of um, be a part of that solution making. Also, yes, you're creating a solution for them, but that element of it is about listening to them and then coming up with a solution that truly is bespoke, that's got elements of uniqueness that's applicable to their own challenges. Now, that's not to say that an out of the box solution is not applicable. I think it's always finding the right balance of um, listening and making sure we understand all the elements that are very unique to them, and then being able to address those, and then having a foundation that says, okay, well, the best practices incorporates these items into that. Um, and when we do that, we come up with a better outcome. Now, one of the organizations that we deal with, specifically with a company that hires cranes, industrial cranes, and lifting equipment, they were in a situation where their contracts are project driven. And so a typical solution in that space would have been that irrespective of projects, you would then create a solution that's a long-term contract, where that doesn't really fit their requirement, and their requirement would be more really akin to needing something as they require it for the length of or duration of the project. So the solution that we came in was really about, okay, well, what's the duration? What are some of the things that are important to you? Whenever those projects are happening or not happening, and then when we came up with a solution that kind of addressed that. and it's a pay-as-you-go model that addresses the volatility in terms of when they're actually requiring specific items. So those are the kind of things that we'd like to do more, and we are doing more. And interestingly enough, I think a lot of businesses would actually appreciate that we can cater to the specific requirements of their business.
And I think 2020 has really shown us the pathway to creating that co-design, listening and truly listening to our customers and to our people, and that notion of collaboration, which is obviously a big part of what the TradeSquare marketplace is all about, is really that collaboration between buyers and sellers and actually listening to what the world needs and responding with that. So I love that case study that you've just given of an example where you've been able to do that as a collective with your customers to create the things that they actually want. So how are you seeing Australian businesses bridge the gap between the world of physical, as life was we kind of formerly knew it, and the world of digital to create growth in their organization, and bringing those two things together in a meaningful way?
No, that's certainly something that we've embraced and continuing to move towards. The digital component is in large part a reaction is probably not a right word, but it really is to address a lot of the disruption that's happening not only in my industry, and that's in transport and finance, but also across a whole section of different industries. I mean, different models, through digital means are really kind of the path forward for a lot of industries. I mean, retail, for one, you just see in terms of, especially with the pandemic, again, amplification in terms of being able to continue to go through a distribution network through digital means. And I think there's inevitably, I believe there's a balance that needs to happen, because I don't think you can get away from the face-to-face interaction or the physical interaction in some areas. But I think it gets heightened, or when you need to, the digital component kind of becomes a part or becomes an integral part of that process. A good, I've kind of highlighted retail already, but another thing is, pharmaceuticals. I mean, that's a business that, in large part, from the way we're seeing it, the way the distribution channels are working, there used to be a lot of face-to-face interaction that was required, whereas now, maybe half of that has gone away, and the way information or knowledge is being distributed is more through digital means. And so the way the model is being upended, I think, is applicable across a whole lot of industries.
And so some of the topics that are in hot discussion at the Oryx office, are you open to sharing some of those?
Yeah, no, we're big on flexibility. I've kind of brought that up previously. The way I look at our business, the Oryx business, is I look at it from a platform perspective, and what I mean by that is I don't look at our products as being leasing or financing or renting. What I look at is what is that platform that allows us to be able to come up with flexible solutions for our customers, and that's a journey. It's easy for me to say that, but in practicality, in terms of how our people execute, it's an education piece and it's a reinforcement piece. It's a journey that we all have to take to make sure that we understand. That's the uniqueness of the Oryx value proposition in ANZ, is that we're the only organization in our space that can actually provide those flexible solutions, whether it's rental, whether it's short-term financing, whether it's a long-term lease. But we're still very much, the legacy of this organization is we're much silo-driven. And so I'm trying to create an organization where we take those away and we really look at solution selling. And part of that underlying component is flexibility. The innovation part is critical. It feeds into that flexibility piece. But sometimes when you talk innovation, it's such an oversubscribed or overused word that people get lost when you're talking about technology and innovation. And so, a more interesting and a more easier way to digest that is really about being able to look at it from being able to offer flexible solutions.
You spoke about innovation, and it is such an overused, but it is also such a huge term. Can you share a bit more about what innovation means within your organization and how that plays out? Because it is so different in every organization. It's not just about the technology. It can be about thinking. It can be about, an innovative way to approach team. How do you use innovation every day in your organization?
So when the term innovation is used, I tend to be a little bit critical, in large part just because I have worked in Silicon Valley for quite a long time. And so when people use the word, I have to measure it against living, breathing, working, in a part of the world where it's just a way of life. Um, so taking that into context and then putting it into the organization that is Oryx ANZ, it's really about how do we change the way we think now, in order to be considered innovation. And a lot of that, people always focus on the technology component, but the reality is it's not just technology. There's a lot more to it than that. It's really about a way of thinking. And it's about a way of thinking that doesn't look at it from a conventional sense. And it's always about trying different things. Some of it, when you throw it up in the wall, some of it will stick, some of it will not. But in large part, it's really about being able to try different things. Now, the technology does come into play, but it's at the tail end of it. And that's really about accelerating things in terms of that adoption. Now, at Oryx, it's good to be able to think differently. And that's something that we've been working on, since in the last 5.5 years. And we've had some success in terms of external recognition on that part. But that's a constant journey. And I also recognize that not everybody will be a part of that journey. And so it's always about, okay, well, how do I make sure that everybody's on board? And in terms of the different way of thinking and the way we embrace technology and digital and Internet of Things, all of that. And it's about, okay, well, again, going back to the term flexibility, if you look flexibility up there, what are the different ways that we support that flexibility, and innovation is one of them.
So with innovation being a big part of the organization and the culture of the organization, I'm sure in the last 5.5 years, there have been highs and lows and everything in between. Are you open to sharing some of the failures? Because, we look at the success of different organizations and, we know that they've come through some serious battlegrounds to get to where they are.
Yeah.
It's not all easy sailing. Is there one thing that stands out for you that you'd be open to share?
Just one? Just
one.
No, the thing with innovation is it's always about, there's an interesting thing about working in Silicon Valley, and that is at some point in your career, you've had at least one, failure in your life. And the question that always gets asked is, oh, okay, great. What'd you learn from it? And it's no different here. Try something, and if you're going to try something, fail fast, and then make sure that you picked up the lessons along the way so that you don't repeat it the second time around. We introduced our SME product, and we called that Voom, and it's been a really good journey for us, and it hasn't been smooth because we've made some assumptions in terms of how we went about it that's bit us, and so that's also been part of the journey. But having said that, that iteration of wrong assumptions that's caused us to fail has also helped us accelerate in terms of, okay, speed to market in terms of how we change it. We need to adapt, and then it just becomes iterative. And so the next version becomes better as a result. So it's been interesting in terms of some of the assumptions that we made, but it's also been feedback loop in terms of how we actually make it a more improved product as a result of the journey.
So going a little wider beyond the world of Oryx, what do you think economic freedom looks like in Australia in 2020 for businesses?
challenging in the sense that I think the pandemic has highlighted, some areas that haven't been affected as much. And it's really about everybody really getting back up to where they were before. I mean, areas such as tourism and education, for example, and education is such a big business in terms of number of foreign students we're bringing to the country. I mean, those have been highly impacted, and tourism and hospitality continues to be a challenging proposition. I think it's a matter of making sure that everybody gets the support that's required, and frankly, part of that is us as consumers, especially either in tourism or as hospitality. It's about recognizing local um, suppliers or local providers of service and frequenting them. So it's sometimes it's as simple as that. But I think 2021, I think there's some challenges there, and I think part of that is making sure that everybody gets a leg up.
And running with that thread of thinking about buying locally and obviously buying in Australia and even buying within your local community and your local ecosystem, regional Australia has had huge growth opportunities, which have really only been amplified and accelerated by this year's pandemic, obviously coming off the back of some terrible trading conditions over the last couple of years. What opportunities do you recognise in regional Australia that we can really support and amplify?
There are elements of regional Australia that are underserviced, and so it's a matter of how do we actually get the goods and services, may it be in conventional means, conventional channels in terms of how we distribute them, or through digital ways. But the regional Australia, certainly there are opportunities in terms of whether you're a small business or a mid-sized business or a large business in terms of how you actually get your goods and services out there. And I've talked about distribution channels or talking about distribution channels. It's finding the right way to get those goods and services out there. There's an education piece also that comes out, and that's really about how do you ensure, sorry, let me back up there. You can't assume that people in regional Australia will understand the same things that the things that we practice in the metro areas, because in the metro area, your business conditions might be different. So there's a means of kind of being adaptable and then understanding some of the challenges in regional Australia and then coming up with a solution that really caters and listens to that environment and to that ecosystem. You can't do a one-size-fits-all, and I think that's where the flexibility, adaptability, the listening all comes into play, because that component, I believe, is underserviced. And I think there's lots of opportunities there.
And I see that there's a consistent thread around, some of your key learnings from this year about assumptions, and particularly about making those assumptions and really listening to the people that are our customers and are our clients. And I think that's a big lesson for us to take from 2020, hopefully into a clear running 2021, to really start to spend that time and listening and not making those assumptions so that we can really co-design and step forward with a solution, as you mentioned before, and business solutions that really reflect the needs and the demands of Australian customers.
Agreed. And I think it's in everyone's best interest to kind of do that. I mean, that's how organizations evolve, whether they're small or large. At the end of the day, it's really about listening and making sure that you can come up with a value proposition that people say, yep, nope, that makes sense. At the end of the day, those are the kind of things that allow you to develop really long-lasting relationships with people. And at the end of the day, business is about relationships, and it has to start somewhere.
Well, thank you, Reggie Cabal, for sharing your world with TradeSquare.
Thank you, Catherine.
For more information on TradeSquare, head to www.tradesquare.com.au and support Australian business economic recovery and growth with a collaborative approach to the future of business.